All right, everyone, welcome to another Esoterica live stream, folks. It's good to see everybody. It's been a fun time here on the channel recently. Really got a lot of cool stuff done. Looking forward to taking some questions, maybe about the Merkavah that's been ongoing, which has been just a ton of fun to work on. I've been wanting to teach this series on Merkavah mysticism for years, and it's really great to be able to get it off the ground. But welcome, folks. Welcome to Esoterica live stream. I'll get to some questions here in a little bit. I don't have as much time as I normally do, unfortunately. I got to run some errands this afternoon before it gets too much later. But yeah, I have an hour hang out. Yeah, what have we been doing on the channel? I feel like there's been just lots going on. The big thing I think since the last live stream was probably this episode on at least my take on the historical Jesus. To what degree it actually represents the Jesus of history, who knows? But yeah, I really enjoyed the episode on the historical Jesus, and it was a real honor to be able to meet and hang out with Dr. James Tabor, who's a scholar whose work I've been reading for years, and who's producing just a lot of great stuff. I mean, his book on Jesus is great. His new, in fact, I just got an advanced copy of his book on the historical Mary. So I'm really looking forward to reading his book on Mary. So it was, this has been a real honor to meet him, and it was a lot of fun to have a conversation with him about Jesus, because who doesn't want to talk about JC? So really a lot of fun doing the episode on Jesus. I got a couple of comments about some things about that episode that maybe I'll mention. Well, I can mention them now. There's two big questions that I got about the Jesus episode. And one of them is there were some complaints that I didn't show my sources for why I was coming to the conclusions that I was coming to. And there's a couple of reasons why I avoided that. The first version of that video was actually going to be putting up Bible references every time I say something. And part of the reason why I didn't do that is I think that it plays into these weird apologetic tropes where I quote Mark 3 something, and then they quote Mark 5 as a counterexample. It gets into this weird apologetical thing, and I just felt like it would be distracting from the overall narrative that I wanted to do. So I just dispensed with it, and it was like, look, people have read the New Testament. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of doing all the chapters and verses and all that. So the other question I got, or the second question I got, was what was the methodology that I was using? How was I prioritizing stuff in terms of the historical probability? And the short answer is, I wouldn't say I was exactly shooting from the hip, but my general idea of how I was doing it was I prioritized Mark, I prioritized Q, or whatever Q. I don't care whether there was an actual document called that was actually Q or not. I think that's immaterial. There's certainly material that Matthew and Luke share in common, that they both drew from a common source, and whether that was an oral tradition or a document or whatever doesn't really matter to me. But that document, Q, or whatever you want to call it. And then whenever, John is a weird example, because John typically is much more interested in theological questions, but John does preserve a lot of interesting like geographical and chronological data that are missing from other documents. So at any rate, the John's interesting for that reason. But basically what I wanted to do was I wanted to take all of those documents and synthesize out of them what I thought was the most likely case of a historical Jesus, based on the fact that I take the text as seriously as I could. That is to say, I wanted to maximize how much of the text I was able to use and avoid things like later interpolations and stuff like that. And that's sort of what shook out of it. And I think that it was okay. I think that I came out with a version of the historical Jesus that makes a lot of sense to me, and I think is again, it's is it a sure thing or a likely thing? I don't know. But I think it's at least a reasonable reconstruction of what the historical Jesus might have been like at some level. The last thing is that a lot of people did not like the fact that I didn't mention that Jesus's last words are actually him quoting from Psalm 22. And the reason why I didn't do that, and this will be controversial, and maybe this is a hot take, is that I think there's something really weird going on with that the Jesus's last words, Eli Eli lama sabachthani, like why he does that. And part of the reason why I'm curious about that is that he doesn't quote it in Hebrew. He quotes it in Aramaic. And not only does he quote it in Aramaic, he quotes it, the word for abandon there, the shoresh for abandon, is not only Aramaic, but it's an Aramaic shoresh that doesn't have a Hebrew equivalent. That is, it's an Aramaic unique shoresh. And what's also interesting about that specific shoresh in Aramaic is that, to my knowledge, none of the Targumim actually use that same word to translate Psalm 22. And so what's interesting about that then is that the quotation that Jesus is making, assuming that the Targumim as we have them have some kind of Mazorah, some kind of tradition of translation, Jesus seems to be doing an automatic translation. He's quoting it or quoting Psalm 22, or he's quoting it live in his own head using using an idiosyncratic mode of expression. So that's just an interesting thing. It's linguistically the my God, why have you abandoned me? Just from a historical linguistic point of view, it's just weird because it's not a targum that we otherwise know, and it's an interesting one because he could have just used a version of the Hebrew in Aramaic, but rather he chose a very particular Aramaic shoresh that doesn't have an equivalent in Hebrew. So anyway, that was a weird thing. Also, there's something about that people quote where they say, look, he quoted this thing, but if you read the rest of it, it ends with Jesus and triumph, or with the character of that psalm in triumph. But the fact of the matter is that makes it all the more depressing. And so I didn't want to include that little tidbit because it just made the story so much more crushing, that if Jesus's last words were basically him throwing down the idea that he was going to win in the end, and somehow God was going to resurrect him, historically speaking, that did not happen in any stretch of the imagination. And so it would just be an absolutely even more gut-wrenchingly sad end to the life of Jesus. So that's the reason why there's linguistic issues and theological issues and just like tenor issues that I didn't want to go down that route. And the last thing, what was the last thing about the Jesus episode that I wanted to say before I moved on? There was one more thing I wanted to say about why I made the decisions that I did. I can't remember now. Yeah, nothing's coming to mind. But at any rate, yeah, what I'm looking forward to doing is the next episode on Paul, and just find Paul fascinating. I find Paul far more fascinating than Jesus. I think that Jesus is there were 50 Jesuses. That was he's uninteresting in many ways historically. What's interesting is how he gets actionized by Paul, and Paul's the real genius of the whole thing. Now, you may not like him just because he's a genius doesn't make him right, but the fact that he developed and develops this incredibly interesting theology is just absolutely fascinating. So I can't wait to get to Paul. I find Paul just far more interesting ultimately than Jesus. Not to say that Jesus wasn't interesting. Of course he was, but I think Paul's the real genius in that whole story. But and then James, we're really interested in turning to James and sort of what did Pauline Christianity, what did non-Pauline Christianity look like? And I think that's a really fascinating question for which we have a little bit, it's a tiny little bit of insight in the letter of James and the letter of Jude, and maybe the Didache gives us some insight into non-Pauline Judaism, and maybe the remnants of the Ebionites. The Ebionites also seem to preserve a kind of Christianity that had not been influenced by Paul, and so are influenced or negatively influenced by Paul. That is to say, they're not interested in Paul's theology. They have a totally different theology of Jesus and his messianic character. So the Ebionites, which I think are really the sad, ironic victims in all of this, is that the people who are probably most close in some sense to the actual historical teachings of Jesus and James and John the Baptizer, that they were ultimately deemed heretics and ran out of town, which is there's something uniquely sad about that fate, that the Ebionites are just condemned. It's really, really, really a pity. But anyway, I mean, and I think some folks maybe at the academic biblical subreddit thought that I was reconstructing the historical Jesus, like full stop, like this is the historical Jesus. It's much more of a thought experiment on what could have been a historical Jesus given the data that we have. And as you can tell, I'm not a mythicist. I don't have any interest. I don't find mythicism at all interesting. In fact, I think that's part of what makes Jesus so clearly interesting as far as he was, is not because he was unique, but because he was typical. There were lots of Jesus-like characters. In fact, there's a whole episode I want to do, and I'm not sure when I'm going to do it. Is do an episode comparing Jesus with who I think to be his closest historical counterpart, and I think his closest historical counterpart is Shimon Bar Yochai. And so I think that Jesus and Shimon Bar Yochai, although Shimon Bar Yochai is a bit later, but I think that in many ways Shimon Bar Yochai is the closest thing that we have to a Jesus-like character in rabbinical Judaism, and they share a lot in common, weirdly a lot in common. So they want to do an episode comparing Shimon Bar Yochai and Jesus, Josh of Nazareth. But what else? What else have we been working on? Got the Jesus episode. Did this great episode on Albertus Magnus, who I have to say I have to really thank my my Patreon supporters, especially the folks that hang out with me on Fridays during office hours. Rachel and Mark really inspired me to do this Albertus Magnus episode, because in many ways he's a character that I know a lot about. And he's lurking in the background of so much stuff in the Middle Ages. He's lurking in the background of Agrippa and of Trithemius and sort of Cologne occultism in general. But I never had got the chance to really do a whole episode on Albertus Magnus, and so it was really great to be able to work on him. And just he's really fascinating, and it really is a pity. And with all due respect to Thomas Aquinas, in many ways I feel like that Thomas Aquinas has stole the thunder of Albertus Magnus, and so that most people even talk about Albertus Magnus as the teacher of Thomas, as if Albertus Magnus himself didn't write a ton. And so it's a pity that Albertus Magnus is not better known. And so hopefully that'll be that episode will be an invitation to do more work on Albertus Magnus, which there's a lot to be done. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to doing an episode on his book on alchemy, or pseudo Albertus Magnus, but doing all that. So I'm looking forward to that, doing more work on Albertus Magnus, who's just a really fascinating character. What else? Yeah, I guess the other big thing is the Merkavah class. This class on Merkavah mysticism is, like I said a moment ago, one I've been threatening to do for years. And I have to admit that part of the reason why I haven't done it was it's just such a difficult material. And if you've ever had the chance to read Hekhalot Rabbati or Hekhalot Zutarti or any of the Masa Merkavah, if you really get into it, it's extremely difficult to understand, and even to follow the text at all is extremely difficult. It's just a mind-bogglingly difficult literature, and especially if you divorce it from its historical context and other kinds of things like that, it just becomes bewildering, frankly. And so it's been a really great opportunity to be able to work on the Hekhalot literature and really get into it. And also, I'm really interested in showing how the Hekhalot literature has had an impact on the development of Western esotericism, because as some folks may know, one of the more interesting ways that the Hekhalot material appears in Western esotericism is, for instance, the translation of Shior Koma actually turns up in the SSM and the Summa Sacra Magici. And so that is really, really interesting, that literally you have Hekhalot material showing up in what is, without any doubt, one of the most important grimoires in Western European history. And that is just fantastically interesting. So, and there's just that world, the world in which the Hekhalot literature entered into Europe is just fascinating. You talk about at Regensburg, you have Hildegard of Bingen there, you have the Chassidei Ashkenaz there. It looks like some magical stuff gets written up there and shipped over to other parts of Europe. So it's absolutely fascinating stuff. So I really am looking forward to getting more deeply into the Hekhalot literature and yeah, and getting into it and showing that it's really important. It's just one of these really important forms of mysticism that outside of a very tiny world of specialists, not many people talk about. And so it's really a pity that it's so poorly known. But I think hopefully this class will help to get it more out there, and so people know more about it. And at least if people do want to learn more about it, at least they'll have basically a college level seminar for free, that they can get into it. What else? What else have we been doing? Oh, we got the Lilith bowls. Yeah, I got to talk to Dee Dee Mangum, who's the ceramicist that I've been working with to make the incantation bowls. So we have about 20 left, just FYI. In fact, less than 20. I think it's like 19. So these bowls go really, really quickly. So if you do want a Lilith bowl, just know that they are selling out really fast. Do not think they'll be available through the weekend. So I would absolutely encourage you, if you want a Lilith bowl, you should go over to Esoterica Rare Books and pick one up now before they definitely sell out. I'll throw a link in the chat if you want one. I think Dee Dee wants to do one more batch of the incantation bowls before the holidays, so they should be available for the holidays. But again, none of that's for sure. So none of that is for sure. But yeah, I mean, historically, the way that these bowls would have been used is that they would have been buried upside down in some part of the house. So most traditionally, we see them buried under the lintel of the house. So they guard the lintel of the house from demons from getting in, or they sometimes were buried in bedrooms. In fact, sometimes we even see them clustered together and buried in bedrooms, or even buried in the four corners of a bedroom. So there were apparently lots of different ways of depositing these incantation bowls. But I would not recommend that you bury your incantation bowl. I think that it's a beautiful work of art. You should much rather put it on display and let people see your incantation bowl as opposed to burying it. But if you want to bury it, that's your money. You can do whatever you want to with it. You can eat cereal out of it. For all I care, it's yours. If you want to spend $250 on a piece of art and eat cereal out of it, that's your prerogative. But yeah, the incantation bowls are going, and also we're having a 20% off sale at the bookstore. So if you want an Esoterica book, if you want one of the rare books that we offer, we do have a 20% off sale going until the next catalog comes out. So we have some cool stuff over there. Albertus Magnus on the Secrets of Women. You have a copy of George Starkey, who's a really important American alchemist, one of the only early American alchemists that we know a lot about. So we have a book by George Starkey. There's a couple copies of the Magia Naturalis, the book on Delaporte's book on natural magic. So lots of great stuff over at the bookstore as well. But also, this is probably going to be one of the last live streams before spooky season. So welcome, assuming that you're not living in spooky season constantly, because I know all of you are. But at any rate, this is sort of the initial descent into spooky season. So where things are going to be ramping up here, as you can imagine. Do a lot of production during spooky season, and so looking forward to that. The leaves on the trees are already changing here in the Detroit area, and so it's amazing. They're already getting some color in the trees, which is just fantastic. It's the best time of the year, at least as far as I'm concerned. So I love fall, love autumn, and I'm looking forward to it getting nice and crisp and sweater weather and all that. In fact, we just got our wood stove serviced, got the chimney swept, and so I'm absolutely ready for first fall wood stove night, because there's nothing better than a chilly night and lighting the wood stove and having a glass of whiskey by the stove. So it's a fantastic way of spending an evening. But yeah, what else? Is anything else going on Esoterica wise? We're going to continue doing we're going to continue doing the Merkavah class. It's going to keep going on. So it's going to be we're going to keep doing until it's done. I don't know how long it'll take us. It's going to be at least, I would suspect, it could be as many as 10 more episodes. So, but yeah, it's going to be great. And I'm looking forward to getting into that material. And for spooky season, I have the deck already lined up. We're going to be covering a lot of really cool stuff. A lot of that's a good thing. What's a neat thing we'll be covering? We're going to be covering the earliest documents documenting Dracula. But one of the interesting things is that everyone has seen these images of Vlad Tepes and him impaling people as he is wont to do, but very rarely do you see or read much about where those documents came from and how they were developed. So we're going to be looking at some of the earliest pamphlets, of which there are only 4 surviving pamphlets, and also we're going to look at the earliest manuscript, which was written sometime about I think 1438 or so. And I don't know, 14 is it 14? Yeah, I think 1460s. But anyway, we'll look at these early pamphlets and these early documents about Vlad Tepes, because I think that he doesn't those early documents, which are really fascinating on their own as part of history, don't get a ton of coverage. So I'll be looking forward to covering those documents. So but yeah, let me take some questions. Like I said, I don't have as much time as I normally do, unfortunately, to hang out, but I want to get some questions and yeah, feel free to throw them in the chat. Obviously, I'll prioritize. The other thing I wanted to mention. Is the Egypt trip. The Egypt trip with Dr. David Litwa. Dr. Litwa is a friend and a colleague, a great scholar, one of the best scholars on Gnosticism, Hermeticism. As you folks know, he's doing a trip to Egypt, a bit like the one that I did. And he's going in November. And I would encourage people, if you want to go on a trip to a very special place, Egypt, seeing some of the most important sites dealing with Hermeticism, Gnosticism, early Christianity, all of that, there's no better person to take you on that trip. And I'm speaking for myself here. I would go on the trip if I could, than going with Dr. David Litwa. So if you want to go on a trip, let me throw the link and the stuff, all the links and stuff in the chat. But if you've ever wanted to go to Egypt and see these sites where Hermeticism, I should have pulled this up beforehand, where Hermeticism and Gnosticism and all this stuff were developed with a real expert, you should absolutely check out this trip with Dr. David Litwa, just because I think it's an amazing opportunity. You shouldn't miss it. I don't know if it's going to happen again, but there's a video about it, and I'll put a link in the description and stuff after this is over for folks who want to do it. But yeah, at any rate, David was a great guy, smart guy, and I think it's going to be a great trip. And I think registration closes September 15th. So if you're on the fence about it, you should look it up, learn about it, make a decision, because registration is closing really, really soon. All right. Let's take a look at some questions here. Grab some. All right, let's see. Will I attend the NINT conference? What is the NINT? I don't know what the NINT conference is. I will be attending the AAR SBL conference in November in Boston. So if you're in Boston and you want to come down to wherever they're going to be hosting the American Academy of Religion and the Society of Biblical Literature conference, I will be there for that, and I'll be hanging out with all those cool people at the conference. So if you want to come hang out in Boston, let me know, because it'll be a lot of fun to meet people there. So we'll be doing that one. Update on the absinthe. So apparently it's mostly sold out. I have to say that I was a bit disappointed in how distribution did not happen. I was, part of the agreement that we worked out was that part of this was going to be that it was going to be available for people to buy online. That never materialized. And so I have to say that on that side of things, I was pretty disappointed in the way that distribution was handled. The other aspects of it were fun. It was fun to make it, fun to have it, and do all the things. But it was disappointing that the distribution was not handled differently. I think if I do another one, I'm going to get more clear assurances that the distribution will be much more wide and that people will be able to get access to it online, be able to buy it online. So yeah, that was a bit of a pity, but you can't control everything. You can't control everything. All right, a couple questions. How do you think a modern Christian thinks of heaven compared to the apocalyptic views of heaven? Your expose showed me its beauty. Do you think its sense is lacking in Christians? I think that the biggest difference between the way people conceive of heaven now and the way that people conceived of it in the apocalyptic is um, that in many ways now it's sort of thought of as like a beautiful place you go after you die. Whereas there's some aspect of that in apocalypticism, but I think more to the point, the apocalyptic is much more terrifying. That God's wrath and the divine splendor are much more objects of terror than anything else. The angels are terrifying. God is terrifying. And the heavens are a much more frightful place, which makes sense if you think about it. I mean, if you ever looked at the heavens for long enough, I mean, they're full of lightning and storms and hail, and all that has to be stored somewhere. And the apocalyptic imagination, imagine it being stored up there. And so I think that the modern conceptions of heaven have been largely defanged, and therefore we get this sort of chubby babies floating on clouds, as opposed to a much more thoroughgoingly awesome vision of heaven that you would have found in the apocalypse literature. What are your takes on the women of the early Nazarene movement? In the video with Dr. Tabor, you mentioned how they were downplayed or slandered or just diminished. It's pretty clear that women played a pretty significant role in the apocalyptic movement, and this is unsurprising because women often play important roles in the foundation of women of religious movements in a lot of ways. You can think about the early women of Islam, the early women of around Joseph Smith. Women have always played a very decisive role in the development of new religious movements. Um, I think that again, we can know very little about Mary Magdalene. We can know very little about Mary, or Mary, the mother of Jesus. But what we do know is that they were there at all times. They followed Jesus around, it seems, and that they were an important part of the early network that made the movement possible. So they were important, but clearly not important enough to be elected to be members of the 12. And again, the members of the 12 were thought of as basically a provisional government, so that when the world comes to an end, that they will be a reinstitution of a proper Israel, and that the 12 were to be representative of the 12 tribes of Israel. Notice that no women were allowed to be members of that. So in some sense, they were important, but also they were downplayed. They're secondary, to say at the very least. And the idea that Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene, I don't think there's any reason to believe that. In fact, I think there's lots of reasons to believe that Jesus's movement may have been vegetarian and maybe even been celibate. That there may have been some sense that the world was coming to an end, and that you had to maintain some degree of ritual purity, a bit like the Essenes, and therefore marriage and stuff was just off the table. Not because it was bad, but because it was stupid. In the same way that Paul basically also thought the world was going to come to an end, and therefore there's no reason to start any businesses or get married. It's a waste of your time. So I think that Jesus's celibacy or lack of marriage had more to do with with um, with that. Also, I think the part of the reason why I don't think Jesus was married was I think Jesus was probably thought of as a mamzer. And again, this gets to the dirty reality that we don't really know how Mary became pregnant, but because Jesus's parentage was questioned halakhically, he would have been at least suspected as a mamzer. And if you are a mamzer in Jewish law, the only people you could marry would be other mamzers. Um, and so, in many ways, being declared a mamzer uh, destroyed Jesus's ability to marry. I mean, basically. And so I think that the suspicion of him being a mamzer would have socially isolated him, and no one in their right mind is going to marry. Could I mean it's not even halakhically allowed, and so nobody's going to marry their daughter to a suspected mamzer. And so So I think that that also would have prohibited Jesus's ability to get married. So I think for apocalyptic reasons and for other reasons, I think that's part of the reason why he was never married. But yeah, I think the women played an important but secondary role. Why don't I engage with mythicism like Richard Carrier? I just think mythicism is not true. I tend to agree with the consensus of scholarship that it's likely that Jesus was a historical character. I say that because we know of lots of people like Jesus, and we know lots of people like Jesus for whom there's very little historical evidence. I mean, I think about someone like Janina Mendoza. There's no historical archaeological reason to believe that Janina Mendoza was a real person. There's no archaeological data, but the way that I would think about Janina Mendoza or Shema Bar Yochai is I'm pretty sure they were historically real people, and that some of the things attributed to them in the rabbinical literature are accurate to what they taught. Am I going to die on the hill of any of that? No. But I think that that they were purely mythical, or Jesus was purely mythical, I think is a position I don't take seriously. I don't think it's taken very seriously by most scholars. Um, yeah, so that's what I'll say about that. All right. Also, I find that the mythicist crowd to be what's the right word of putting it? They're vexing for the same reason that religious fundamentalists are vexing. That there's a kind of sneering, smug arrogance that I notice in a lot of the mythicism crowd, and it's the same thing I see in the apologetic crowd. It's this sort of smug arrogance, and it's like it just the way the mythicist crowd behaves on the internet is just gross in a lot of my experience. And so it's one of those things where like neither believe in the position intellectually, nor do I want to associate with the people specifically. um, which again is painting with a broad brush, but I've had this experience several times where I've just had bad experiences with mythicists, and bad on the exact same way that religious fundamentalist apologetics people. Um, and so, like I said, I find that mythicism is it functions objectively as a kind of religious fundamentalism, and not. I don't want to really engage with that. Doing a critique for the Kybalion from my Masonic Lodge. What's your opinion on that book? And do you have any papers or suggestions for a critique? I guess it depends on what you want to critique it for. I think if you want to critique it as not authentically Hermetic, which means to say that there's no historical connection to Hermeticism, and nor is there a philosophical connection to Hermeticism, then that's a critique that could be made. I think if you really want a good resource for that, Dr. Dana Trell, the modern Hermeticist, has made a fantastic video analyzing the Kybalion from those perspectives, and I think I basically agree with the positions that he comes to. On the other hand, I feel like the Kybalion becomes a whipping boy from neo-Hermeticists because for many people, they come to Hermeticism via the Kybalion, and unfortunately, that book is representative basically of 20th century New Thought and not historical Hermeticism in any real respect. So I dislike the fact that it pretends to be connected to Hermeticism in a way that it historically and philosophically is not. However, if the Kybalion as a piece of philosophy or spirituality speaks to you, then who cares? I mean, who cares whether it's connected to the historical Hermetica or not? This is a weird thing that I find is that many people want things to be true and ancient. But the truth of the matter is things can be true and not ancient at all. There's nothing about antiquity that makes anything true. Just because in fact, something being ancient makes it less likely to be true, in my opinion, half the time. And so I think that the merits of the Kybalion stand on the Kybalion as a piece of religious philosophy. And if that speaks to you, great. And you don't need it to be Hermetic. But I think that it's disingenuous to think it's historically incorrect, and it's disingenuous to pretend to the idea that the Kybalion is connected to the the traditional historical body of Hermeticism. But let me just add one more caveat to all that. The Hermetica is not internally coherent. There is not one coherent philosophy inside of the Hermetica. The Corpus Hermeticum itself is infused with overlapping voices which don't agree with one another. There's clearly a dualist strand in there that seems to be maybe a later Gnosticizing commentator, as some folks say. But there's clearly, even within the Hermetic literature itself, philosophical and spiritual tensions that are not easily resolved. And so I would say that, again, with the Kybalion, the value of that text stands and falls on you reading it and appreciating it. And I don't think that anyone needs to criticize it, aside from criticizing it on its own merits or criticizing its pretended connections to historical Hermeticism. But the idea that it is not connected to historical Hermeticism doesn't at all affect its spiritual or philosophical nature. Which, again, I find that weird. It's a sort of baby in the bathwater. I feel like it can be perfectly usable on its own. What do you think Christianity would look like today if Marcionism was a dominant belief? I think anti-Semitism would be a much bigger problem. I think Marcionism, Marcionistic elements of Christianity evolved into European anti-Semitism. So I would worry about that a bit. But frankly, I think most Christians are kind of Marcionites. I mean, how many Christians have I met who say things like, yeah, the Old Testament was like all law and order, and the New Testament is like kumbaya Jesus. It's all about love. And isn't that a form of like Marcionism? Like I sometimes refer to this as Mississippi Marcionism, because I grew up in Mississippi with basically a bunch of Marcionites. And I think that in some sense, the average Christian has a kind of crypto Marcionite theology. Now, it's not developed in the whole way that, the creator of the world was really an angel or a bad creator or whatever. But there is some sense in which there is a discontinuity between a law, thunder and wrath Hebrew Bible God and Jesus, the love God. Hippy dippy Jesus comes later. So my short answer is Marcionism kind of did win, at least for average, normal Christians, not theologians. Theologians are patently abnormal people. But for normal Christians, I think Marcionism carried the day in many ways, a kind of crypto Marcionism, but still a kind of Marcionism just the same. All right, get a couple more questions. Let's see. AK Treadwell, thank you so much for the super sticker. I appreciate that. It's very kind of you. Appreciate that. Is there any possibility that Jesus himself was familiar with early Hekhalot literature? So one, I don't think the Hekhalot literature existed at that time. So there's no literature probably in the first century. But could Jesus have been aware of some kind of ascent technology? Mystical ascent technology? That seems possible. But also Jesus was, I think he was sort of what's the right word? Like a hillbilly preacher. He wasn't, knee deep in the rabbinical academies. I think he had a very minimal, kind of rabbinical training, sort of like a smart amateur if you ever hang out in the yeshiva world, there's always that one guy that hangs around in the yeshiva all the time, and he's not a rabbi or anything, or but he's pretty smart and he's learned a lot. But I don't think Jesus was part of the elite circles of the rabbis that ultimately would become, the folks around Hillel and Shammai that would become the Ta'anim, the Tanas. So I don't think he was that high up. So in that case, I don't think he would have been privy to the kind of stuff that was going on in the the early versions of what became Hekhalot literature. But it certainly didn't exist, I think, at that time. Oh, let's see a couple things. Why do you think the Merkavah writers use names derived from Greek or Latin for the angels? Were those the sort of names associated with military strength, considering the martiality of the heavens? So we don't know. So in Hekhalot Rabati, there are definitely cases where there are divine names and nomina barbara, which seem to have their origins in Greek and Latin, and sometimes whole sentences will be in Greek, written in Hebrew letters, of course, but it'll be a Greek sentence. And we see something similar happening in the Greek magical papyri. The shorter answer is I don't know. It's very strange. Why in the world would Greek and Latin names end up in these texts? And we looked at like the name Metatron and Sandalphon. These are clearly not Aramaic or Semitic sounding words. But what's interesting is we see something happening like that in the New Testament. Remember the guy that gets possessed, the Gerasene demoniac. When Jesus asks that guy his name, remember the demons, they refer to themselves as a legion. That's obviously the 5,000 plus auxiliaries. It's a contingent of the Roman army. And aside from the social commentary, which is pretty thick there, right? A guy is possessed by a Roman legion, and that's obviously there's some pretty on the nose allegories for the colonization of the region and all that. But here we have another case where a demon announces themselves as having an essentially Latin name. So it must have been the case that perhaps Latin and Greek had some currency. Maybe they were thought of as an elite language, that your spoken Aramaic is kind of your spoken language, and your Hebrew is an academic language. But maybe Greek and Latin were also prestige languages, or maybe they're Gentile languages and they had a certain air to them. It's the same way that weirdly in movies now people still like use Latin to like talk to demons, as if demons are going to be more able to be conjured in Latin for whatever reason. But these prestige languages maybe had a certain kind of element of I don't know, je ne sais quoi that the Hekhalot writers decide to put in them. But I don't know. I find it genuinely perplexing that some of the secret names of God, or at least a couple of the secret names of God in the Hekhalot literature, and some of the angels, the names are ultimately derived from Greek, written in Hebrew, or written in Aramaic letters. So puzzling. I don't have a great answer. I think I might actually write to Davila and Schaefer and ask them what they think. Maybe they're obviously far more learned than I am, and maybe they would be able to speculate about that. Maybe I'll write to them. All right, scroll up a little bit more. Sorry, I left my mouse downstairs, so I'm having to scroll with my fingers. It's not super. People eat their Lucky Charms out of the incantation bowls. You'd ruin the incantation bowl and your Lucky Charms. They'd be unlucky charms. All right. Do you think a state of mind can make you lucky? Probably not. Yeah, I don't think that states of mind do much. I don't know if luck is even a thing. I wish it were. Outlining a fictional work that centers around the Rephaim. Would love some video on this. I did a whole episode on the Rephaim. You got to go check it out. Always interesting when people ask me to make videos that I've already made. But there's already an episode on the Rephaim. So if you want to go check out the episode, you can absolutely do that. So yeah, definitely already done one on the Rephaim. Have I seen the useful charts videos on biblical history accuracy? Are those videos legit? Yes. Useful Charts is an absolutely great channel. I've worked with Matt a couple times on his video on the Talmud. Zevi and I helped him to do some editing on it. So it's fantastic. His channel is fantastic, very reliable. He's great. So yeah, absolutely worth doing. Would I ever consider doing a series on the history of tarot? So this is like again a funny, dirty history moment for me, where I have to admit in public that I don't know anything about tarot cards. Nothing. I literally know nothing about tarot cards. Like, the extent of my knowledge is that they were initially made for card games, and then eventually they became a divination tool. That is literally the extent of my knowledge of the tarot. This is, I think, the difference between people who learn about esotericism because they're interested in esoteric practice versus people who learned about it because they're just intellectually interested in it. Is that I came to Western esotericism totally disinterested in practice and still disinterested. And therefore, things that were mostly practice oriented, like tarot cards, are things I just never learned anything about. So, yeah, it's just a hilarious gap in my knowledge. I mean, there's many, many gaps in my knowledge, obviously, but I think one of the more conspicuous gaps is that I just know nothing about tarot cards. In fact, I've only had tarot cards read for me once, and it was a very great experience in Amsterdam, where I got to have a tarot reading with an original wider right deck, an original one, like an original one from Safa, who is just an amazing person. But that's so. And I don't know anything about tarot cards, so I don't think I'll probably do an episode. I bet Angela Puka knows a lot more than I do about that, so maybe she will. But yeah, I just don't even know much about tarot cards. Oh, the NINT conference is the New Insights in the New Testament. No, I mean, I'm not really a Bible scholar, folks. And this is a thing that I have to. It's a thing I really should say more, actually. Um, to make this clearer is that I'm not a Bible scholar. I don't know how it is the case that I've become this like Yahweh person. Like, every podcast who wants to do a podcast about Yahweh, it's different people want to talk about Yahweh, and then I end up talking about Yahweh. I'm not an expert in Bible. Um, Kip Davis said, yeah, you're not a Bible expert, but you certainly play one on TV. Yeah, I play one on TV. I'm just relying on books that I read. I'm just relying on Mark Smith and Francesca Stavrakopoulou and other people who've written fantastic books about, about Yahweh or Jesus or whatever. But I am and by no means a Bible expert, so, or Hebrew Bible or Bible expert in general. So I don't know that I would even there'd be a good reason for me to be there, just because I'm not sure I would contribute anything of any substantial insight, of substantial insight there. So, all right. Let me get a couple of, have I read the Book of Mormon? Yeah, I have read the Book of Mormon. I love Mormonism. The Latter-day Saints are just one of my favorite religious movements. In fact, I'm rereading a biography, the famous biography of Joseph Smith, No Man Knows My History. So, in anticipation for traveling to Utah, to go to when the new temple, the new temple, and the temple in downtown Salt Lake is opened to the public. I'm going to go do a tour. Dan McClellan said we're going to hang out, so do some more LDS tourism. I've been there before and did some LDS tourism. Go down to see Reed Moon's bookshop down, I think it's in Provo. But yeah, I've read the Book of Mormon. I find it to be a terribly fascinating, like all Mormon documents. I mean, whether Pearl of Great Price or Doctrines and Covenants, I just love. I mean, it's just like having an American Gnosticism. And that's the coolest thing about, Mormonism in general, is that it is effectively American Gnosticism. It is a uniquely American esoteric religiosity. Um, and you would know that by looking at many LDS folks, but it's absolutely the case that it is a deeply esoteric spirituality, and it's just fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. So no, I love LDS stuff. Now, does any of that make it true? Well, of course not. I think Joseph Smith was uh, inventive. But the truth of the matter is, lots of religions get founded by very inventive people. So I don't at all think that Joseph Smith has the monopoly on that. That's for sure. All right, we got a couple of these. couple more questions. Yes, I have read Foucault's Pendulum. I have read Umberto Eco. I've read Foucault's Pendulum. I tried to read In the Name of the Rose, but it just felt like work. It just felt like I was reading books to do an esoteric episode. They're great. I mean, Umberto Eco is clearly one of the great literary geniuses of the 20th century. His book on semiotics is fantastic. His book on ugliness is fantastic. But no, I love Umberto Eco, but I have to say that when I read him, it feels like I'm doing work. And when I'm trying to read novels, I'm trying to not do work. So, all right. A Mamzer. Some folks are asking what a Mamzer is. A Mamzer, this is hard to translate to English because there's no technical translation. It gets translated, I think it's bastard, but a Mamzer is just any child born born in a way that is through sexual relations which are forbidden by the Torah. So, for instance, if like if a brother and sister had a baby together, which obviously there's lots kinds of things of that baby's a Mamzer. If you're not divorced and you have a baby, that baby could be a Mamzer. So Mamzer just and the question of the problem with Mamzers is that Mamzers can only marry other Mamzers. And when you have a situation of questionable birth, and I don't know the exact rabbinical position on this, but I think that the default practice is many people just assume that the child's a Mamzer. And marrying Mamzerim, being married, is a huge problem. And making sure that you're. In fact, one of the magical tricks that you get when you do the Hekhalot mysticism is that you learn to tell when people are Mamzers. That's one of the magical powers that you get after you stare at the divine throne, is that you can literally look into a crowd and be like, that guy's a Mamzer and she's a Mamzer. So it's one of the magical powers that you get. But at any rate, I think this is a weird thing that I've never heard mentioned vis-a-vis Jesus. That part of the reason why he may have not been married was that he was a suspected Mamzer. So I don't know why that doesn't get mentioned, but it seems possible. But yeah, sorry, I didn't clarify what a Mamzer is. But yeah, I guess translated as bastard, but it's not what it is. So Andrew, so this is a good question about the symbolism of the water ordeal, and the short answer is we don't know. I'll be doing a whole lecture in the Merkavah series just on the ordeals inside of the what I call the mythscape of the Hekhalot. But we know that the room, the antechamber before you enter into the divine throne room, that entire chamber is made of alabaster. And having seen my share of alabaster while in Egypt, if you see really, really pure alabaster, it has that wavy effect in it. And I can imagine if you were in a room made entirely of alabaster, especially if that's bathed in light, like backlit from behind, which I guess it would be because God's in the next room, it would look like water. And so there's something about the descender has to be able to be discerning. That's the big thing, and specifically discerning about truth and falseness. And there's something about the water test in the antechamber before you enter into the main room where the throne room is that this seems to be like an illusion, and that if you fail the illusion, you're unworthy to go into the divine throne. In fact, in some cases, you're killed and stuff. So I think it's about discernment. And again, that might be tied to sorry if you're hearing a beeping sound, it's because they're delivering something. But that issue of discernment is really important, because one of the things that matters, for instance, is that when you get into the divine throne room, there seems to be one last test. And that test is that Metatron's in there. And if Metatron is sitting on the throne of God, you have to be able to do what Elisha ben Abulia failed to do, and that's discern the difference between a God and an angel. And Elisha failed to do that and declared they were two gods, whereas Akiva, for reasons laid out in Chagiga and Masechta Chagiga, he is able to discern the difference between God and an angel, and he was able to descend and ascend Bashalom in peace. So I think it has to do with discernment. I think the water ordeal is about testing your ability to discern truth from falseness, what's real from what's not real, etc. So I think it's bound up in that. But I'll be giving a whole talk just I'll be giving a whole talk just on that topic. Yeah, we'll do a whole thing on yeah, we're gonna do a whole talk just on ordeals inside of the mythscape of the Merkavah world. All right, a couple more and I gotta go, unfortunately, guys. Miss Flipper, so what is the significance of anointing in first central Israel? It's just how you make kings and priests, right? Anointing was just putting oil on someone's head, ritual act of putting oil on someone's head, and that's how you were inducted into the priesthood, or you were inducted into a king. It's a bit like inauguration, right? And hear that word, right? Inauguration, like the August, like the augustness, like you're made into some kind of more sacred power. You're given some more sacred power, and so this is how you made kings and priests. So Moshiach is just anyone who's been anointed, typically into the priesthood. Aaron was anointed into the priesthood, and kings were anointed with oil to become kings of Israel. But there were other anointed people, and it could also be a metaphor, right? Cyrus, the king of Persia, was declared to be a Moshiach, an anointed one of God. I don't think any Israelites put any oil on Cyrus's head, but he was anointed in some sense by God to play a role in history, and his role in history, of course, in that case, was to let the Israelites go back home. Do I have an opinion about the Safaria website as a textual resource? Safaria is great. I mean, I use Safaria literally all the time. It's on my phone. When I'm just like bored and sitting around, I pop up Safaria and just read some Parish or something, some commentary on the Torah. So I read Safaria constantly, and I will say, with many thanks to now Rabbi Ethan Davidson. He's a friend of mine and a wonderful person who recently received smicha. He was ordained as a rabbi. It's because of his efforts that the entire Babylonian Talmud is available for free in a really good translation on Safaria. So if you ever read the Babylonian Talmud on Safaria, you can thank Rabbi Ethan Davidson. Do I think the story of the Exodus in the Bible is based on real events? Not the way it's described in the Bible. There's no good archaeological or historical reasons to believe the Exodus happened the way the Bible describes it. There's the Levitical Exodus theory that says that some priests may have left, and that becomes the foundation of the Levitical priesthood. That seems possible. But I think it's Friedman's argument. But I don't think that the Exodus happened the way that or rather, I'd say there's not good evidence to believe that it happened the way that the Bible describes it. Why do you think contemporary Christians disregard St. Augustine and his Christian philosophy? I just don't think that normal people read philosophy. Like, why would they do that? I mean, I'm all about. I think Augustine's amazing. I think he's one of the standout thinkers of late antiquity, perhaps the standout thinker in late antiquity. If you've never read Augustine, you're missing out. I mean, on the City of God and the Confessions are just some of the most impressive pieces of writing of late antiquity. And so, he's our only real major witness to the fall of the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. He's just super, super interesting. Yeah, I love Augustine, but I think that people don't regard him just because they just don't read him because they're normal. I mean, that's not great, but it's not terrible either. But I'd recommend anyone who's interested in late antiquity, you got to read Augustine. Oh, look at this useful chart. It's in the chat. My goodness. It's a real honor to have you here, brother. I hope you have a good Shabbos. I really appreciate all the work you do. You do just absolutely fantastic work. And, it's again, I look at the work of Matt and look at like that kind of stuff, and it makes me like proud to be in a community of creators that produce just such useful, just amazing stuff. So thank you so much for the work that you do, the educational labor that you do here on YouTube. You help to enrich millions of people through the work you do, and it's thoughtful and well done. So thank you so much for that work. Folks, if you're not subscribed to Useful Charts, make sure you go and subscribe. Absolutely wonderful stuff. Oh, this is a funny one. Which biblical prophet do you most identify with? Oh my goodness. This is like you have to be you have to be careful. I don't know. I don't know. I don't think I want to be a prophet. They typically make a lot of people angry and then they get killed. So I don't think I want to be a prophet. Yeah, I don't want to be a prophet. I don't think I identify with any of them. I find Amos to be hilarious. I like Amos a lot. He calls people cows of Bashan. I don't know. No, I don't think I have a specific prophet that I identify with. So I have to think about that more. That's a funny question, though. Thankfully, not Ezekiel because he's nuts. Thank you for the super chat. Yeah, I'm going to do a whole episode actually on the Urim and Thummim. That's like on the docket. It's like in the list. So I will do an episode on divination, because it's interesting. The Bible never prohibits divination in general. It just says that there's this very particular way you have to do divination, and it's through this business of the Turim, the rose on the high priest's chest, and there's all kinds of interesting rabbinical documents about how this worked. I think my favorite one is that that there were letters written on the gems of the breastplate, and that you would basically ask the Urim and Thummim a question, and that the letters would light up like a light bright or something, and it would answer your question, spell out the answer via the gems lighting up. I don't know don't think it really happened like that, but I do like that story, and I do like the idea that the Bible is very interested in divination, but it's a very particular kind of divination. I also like the fact that God just doesn't answer sometimes. One of the saddest moments in the Hebrew Bible is Saul is going to war against the Philistines, I think, and he goes and asks the Urim and Thummim, and it doesn't answer, and that's why he goes to the Baal Adov, the witch of Endor, because the Urim and Thummim just didn't answer him. So what a sad end to Paul, or to Saul. Do you know what Aaron Leach thinks about Madimi? I don't know. I don't know what Aaron thinks about Madimi. That'd be a good question to ask him. Yeah, next time I talk to him, I'll ask him what he thinks about Madimi. Absolutely the standout spirit in the Enochian session. Certainly the I will say the genuinely creepiest. For whatever reason, I always imagine Madimi kind of looking like the two girls from The Shining. Like, play with us forever, like that. They like creepy little girl vibes. I always imagine her kind of being like that, but then she grows up and becomes weirdly like sexual and flirtatious, and there's that scene where she's like covered in blood. No, if we could ever make a John D. Edward Kelly movie, which now that the Conjuring series is over, whoever the James Wan, the Conjuring people need to do this, but you could make those sessions, some of them extremely creepy and like Hellraiser-ish, really weird, especially with Madimi. Yeah, genuinely creepy entity. Remember when I first read the True Faithful Relation when I was a teenager? I just remember like instantly finding all of the entities genuinely creepy, like angels, spirits, all of them. They all creep me out. And in many ways, that's kind of like Jewish angels. They're terrifying. They're not your friend. They're not there to help you. They're really unworrying. But yeah, I found them to be creepy, and this is the reason why people think, I think many Christians will look at the John D stuff and say these are not angels; these are all demons. This is all they were futzing about with them. And that is not an unreasonable belief to have, just frankly. Matt asked, what's the chart on the wall behind me? I don't know. I'm actually in my sister-in-law's office because my office is under construction. But it looks like some lefty Jewish stuff. Oh, it says understanding anti-Semitism. I don't know. I'll have to take a look at it and let you know. Do you think you'll ever be open to beginning esoteric practice? Probably not. It's not a thing that interests me a whole lot. It is interesting, but it's not a thing that interests me a whole lot. So probably not. Why Lacan? That's the question. Why Lacan? Why? I like Lacan because I like structuralism. I'm a fan of structuralism. I'm a fan of Lacan because I like structuralism. I like the way that he thinks, in the sense of I like the way he. Sorry, way of putting it. I like the way he forms questions and then goes out seeking the answers. I find that he. I like that. The idea of the unconscious is structured like a language is something I find deeply compelling, even if I'm not sure I believe that. But it's fascinating. It's fascinating stuff. I think that in general he's just a genius, and I really appreciate the way that he operates. So. Veronica, more Mary Magdalene videos. I don't think so. I think that I've done the one on the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. I think that the Western tradition just does her so dirty in terms of after Gregory basically makes her into a sex worker, and the story becomes this redemption story where she's a sex worker and Jesus casts out demons and fixes her. And but I don't know if specifically I'll do one on Mary Magdalene. I think I might do one on the Marys, on Mary, the mother of Jesus, on Mary Magdalene, and maybe some other women around the early Jesus movement. So I may do an episode about women in the early Jesus movement, of which Mary Magdalene would be there. But I'm not sure I would do a whole episode on just Mary Magdalene. Giorgiani's interviews. Giorgiani is not a person I take very seriously. So questions about the relationship of the Hekhalot traditions, the Copper Scroll, and the Book of Revelation. I don't think that the Copper Scroll has anything to do with Hekhalot Merkavah material on the face of it. Now, the Book of Revelation is on the other hand, certainly does. The Book of Revelation is very much tied to it's literally called the Apocalypse of John. It's very much tied up in the apocalyptic literature, and in that sense, it has some connection to the world that would produce the Merkavah mysticism. And Schaeffer says as much. He has a whole subchapter on just the Apocalypse of John in his fantastic book on the origins of Jewish mysticism. So certainly I would connect those two, the Apocalypse of John and Merkavah mysticism to some degree, but not so much the Copper Scroll. The Enochian language makes me wonder, if humans were to encounter the philosophy of higher beings, do you think that the very concepts might be untranslatable? I don't think so. Human beings are extremely diverse, and human languages are crazily diverse. And we've been able to translate extremely difficult philosophical texts from one language to another. There are translations. I think there are translations of like Being and Time in the Japanese. That just seems mind-bogglingly difficult, So I think that, assuming that we inhabit the same laws of physics, I imagine we should be able to do some significant degree of communication. There's a great movie out about the aliens and the language stuff. Signs? No, that's not that movie. I can't remember it, but it's a great movie about sort of this problem about could we? And the answer is maybe. I think it's possible. If you have questions when outside, is there a way to email me? Yes, you can email me, but it's much easier for me to answer in live streams because I don't always get to my email. This is a great question. Why is Jewish esotericism considered Western, but Islamic esotericism not? Arabia is 10 miles away from Israel. Because of stupidity. That's the answer. There was in the 2000s, there was this raging debate about should we continue to talk about Western esotericism? And one of the reasons why people did not like the idea of Western esotericism is it left out Islamic esotericism. And it's funny because Dan Natrell and I came to the same conclusion. Arabia is the West. It's just part of the West, right? Like, as simple as that. Like the Hikmah, like Arabia is just part of the West. Of course, the West is complicated and diverse, but I would just put, there's no way I'm, Ibn Sina and he's Al-Ghazali, he's Western philosopher. So I've always it has always struck me as bizarre that this has puzzled people the way that it has, where the easiest solution and the most obvious solution is it's just Western esotericism. Jewish esotericism, Western esotericism, Islamic esotericism, Western esotericism. I mean, basically, I would say all the way to Persia, right? Basically, until you hit that mountain range, right? The Himalayas, you hit that mountain, and then that's the East. Beyond that's the East. And to me, I just feel like it's not that the Western and Western esotericism needs to be dropped. It just needs the West needs to understand itself as far broader than we often do. And it's just old school Orientalism and boring bad stuff like that. My opinion of Manly P. Hall. I've never read Manly P. Hall. Just never read anything he's ever written. It's too modern for me. So I've never read any Manly P. Hall. I know people who I trust who have great opinions of him, but I've never read any Manly P. Hall. And so I can't say one way or the other. I don't know much about him. So we published a book in the context of the Agrippa seminar. Will there also be something for the Merkavah one? The short answer is maybe. I have a couple ideas percolating in my head. I don't know if they'll come to anything. One of them is a video game, but I'm waiting on that one. But yeah, I have some ideas about possible publications vis-a-vis the Merkavah mysticism course. But yeah, one of them is a video game. Fancy that. All right. Is it reasonable to consider the possibility that some amount of the Merkavah literature was intentionally metaphoric, discussing the more mundane spiritual journeys of faithful people? I think that the unity of the literature and the way it's composed, I think, are downstream of phenomenology and not downstream of literature. And this is a position that Gershom Scholem originally had, and I think Scholem was right. But I don't think it's metaphors. I think that these are very staccato elements of lived mystical experiences that have become literature. So I don't think they're metaphors or homiletical. That's, this is what Himmelfarb believed that they were. It was homiletical literature based primarily on Sukkot sermons. I don't buy that. I think that I agree with Scholem that we're looking at again through a funhouse mirror, right? But we're looking at the results of phenomenology. Oh, the seventh letter question. why did Plato write the seventh letter? I do think it's authentic. And why did he write it? I think he wrote it to telegraph that he had secret teachings. I mean, I think it's as easy as that. But yeah, I think he had secret teachings, and I think that's yeah, I think that's just the long and short of it. Although I think his secret teachings would be very boring. I think they're just math. I think it's just like, I mean, if you look at Speusippus, I mean, again, go read some of the fragments that are left of Speusippus about numbers and stuff. They're extremely boring. So I think that on the one hand, it's interesting that they exist, but I think on the other hand, it's likely that they would be it'd be on abstract numbers and stuff. So, if we found proof that the paranormal or supernatural were real, what next? If we had sure evidence of the paranormal, then we should just run with that. I mean, that needs to be investigated with just as much money as we throw into particle colliders, we should be throwing money into that. But because whatever story we tell about reality, if we see evidence of something supernatural, whatever natural means now, I mean, literally there are electrons tunneling inside my phone. I don't know what even it means to talk about electrons tunneling, but whatever nature is, if it has some exotic quality, like what we would consider the supernatural, the paranormal, then we should investigate it. It's as simple as that. That's the right way of putting it. I mean, the world is strange enough that the world is strange enough that we should not be surprised that it surprises us. But the trouble is, we just don't. I've never seen any evidence to my satisfaction that argues for what people typically refer to as the paranormal, whether it's ghosts or ESP or. I've never seen evidence that I find sufficiently compelling for me to believe in it. But if it were to occur, if we were to find it, I would be the least surprising thing. I would be like, yeah, okay, sure. They're psychics. Okay, that's interesting. Now we got to figure that out. Or, ghosts or whatever. I think that, frankly, the electron tunneling is far weirder, or entangled. These recent experimental things they've done with entanglement, that's far stranger than like if we found evidence of ghosts. That would be the most boring. Okay, they're ghosts. There's a soul. Like it would be like it would be completely underwhelming compared to the other extremely weird things we've discovered about the nature of reality. So in some sense, I would be like, okay, but tell me where the electrons go when they tunnel. That's the real question. Well, that's a more interesting question. So, but yeah, I would be unsurprised and unimpressed. If prophets were actually exist, how would we identify one in modern times? They would be the most irritating person that you could imagine. I mean, we do have prophets. They're just people that are on the margins of society, and they tell us that we're wrong, that we're doing evil things, and that we don't think we're doing evil things, but we are doing evil things. And they tell us that we're doing evil things, and they do it in strange ways. They exist. They exist right now. I mean, you've ever gone to a protest, there's probably a bunch of prophets there. And people hate them, and they're irritating. I've been to lots of protests. I've led protests. I agree with everybody who says they're irritated. They're extremely irritating. But that's what prophets are. There are people who looked at the world and said, this world's messed up, and I'm going to tell the people that are doing it to their face that it's messed up. So yeah, there's all kinds of prophets out there that I think that do that. And that's why people kill them, because they're irritating. Like this shirt, I bet it was made in a sweatshop somewhere. Do I really want I'm sure my clothes were made in a sweatshop. This computer was made in a sweat. This stuff made by kids, right? I mean, all this stuff was made in horrifying conditions. Do I really want to have a person standing outside on the lawn screaming at me about how I'm exploiting children in the third world all the time? No, it would be extremely irritating. It'd be true, but it would be it would be irritating, and it would be like, make me feel bad. And I'd want him to shut up, because I don't want to think about the fact that I'm exploiting people by owning a phone or whatever. But it's absolutely the case. So yeah, there are prophets everywhere. There are all kinds of prophets. And now, if you're asking people who tell the future, that's a different thing, because prophets basically, at least Hebrew Bible prophets, never told the future. And in the one case they tried, they got it wrong. Ezekiel prophesied the destruction of Tyre, and it didn't get destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, at least. But yeah, a lot of prophets around. But it's called activists now, and they're irritating, even if they're right. And trust me, I am absolutely pointing a finger at me as much as anybody else. You can be right and still be irritating. All right, folks, I think I'm not going to be able to get to all these questions, unfortunately, because I got to get going. What time is it? Oh, yeah. Oy. But let me... Yeah, Arrival. That's the name of that movie, the alien language movie. That was a great movie. I like movies in which being smart is how you solve problems. I like that. I like critical thinking is the answer, because almost always when you deal with evil or mysterious things in movies, the answer is like shoot at it a lot, and like that's the answer. I much prefer movies where the answer is think hard and a solution will be forthcoming. That's a far better movie. How's the library coming? Well, you can tell I'm not in there. I'll upload some pictures of something to show you, but it's coming. I mean, it's a slow process. There's a lot of wiring and changing lighting and moving things around. So it's a huge, big process, but it is slowly coming together. Thank you for the super sticker. I'm the biggest skeptic in the world. I'm also very crazy for real. Okay. So I check every thought with logic. That sounds terrible. I try to check stuff with logic as little as possible. Logic's a terrible way of analyzing thought. Lately, however, the universe is talking to me. I blame you. I don't think I'm responsible for that, but okay. I'd be curious to know what the universe is telling you. Be careful. Be curious to know what the universe is telling you. The universe is a nightmarish place. I don't want the universe to tell me anything. It's mostly just radiation and cold. Yeah, I absolutely don't want to hear anything that the universe has to say to me. All right, just getting a couple of last ones. Thank you, Fallowfield. Homer Simpson. All right, folks. Well, and sometimes people ask me what would be sufficient proof for me that that they were in touch with a supernatural intelligence or something like that. And my answer is always the same exact answer. If anyone is psychic or talks to angels or talks to spirits or talks to God, the one thing that would convince me that you could do it is if you could give me a solution for the Kalantz conjecture. Sometimes I call it the Enochian Kalantz theorem. Like, of course, I'd be interested in knowing where buried treasure is, but I'd much more be interested in seeing if the angels or whatever can give me a proof for the Kalantz conjecture. And so that's always for me, that would be, I don't know if it'd be proof, but it'd be damn close. So yeah, if you have mystical magical powers, give me a solution of the Kalantz conjecture and I will talk to you. Aside from that, not super interested. Oh, Dan, sorry you missed the stream. It's good to see you. I had the great pleasure of hanging out with Dr. Dan Trail the other day. He was kind enough to drive like 3 hours to come hang out with me and my family. And it was great. It was really a lot of fun to hang out with Dan. We got a lot of great conversations. So it was really it was a lot of fun. But yeah, someone's mentioning the Kalantz conjecture. Yeah, like I said, just give a convincing proof. I mean, there's like 10 outstanding major math problems. Just provide a solution for any of those. So, all right, folks. Well, I'm going to get going because I got to get to run some errands and stuff before Shabbat. But yeah, looking forward to spooky season with everybody. We're gonna have a lot of cool content, and yeah, I'm looking forward to making a lot of fun time, a lot of fun content, and enjoying spooky season with all you guys. So I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you so much for the super sticker. I appreciate it. Yeah, well, folks, have a good weekend. Have a good Shabbat. If you do observe Shabbat, I hope you have a great one. Otherwise than that, folks, I will see folks later on. Yeah, we'll be recording the next series in the Hekhalot class, and we'll continue on with that. So everybody, have a great afternoon, and I'll talk to folks later.